right, my darlings, let's get into this project. So today is mostly going to be top stitching and finishing. I only did a tiny thing between last session and this session, which is I went in and I pressed my belt and I turned under those raw edges and pressed them down. When I pressed them, I went in and I clipped them in place so they would not come untucked. I tried to press them under fairly evenly, but to be honest, I eyeballed it. So maybe it's not the most even, but it is even enough visually, and that is perfectly fine for this kind of project. But if you have something where you're like, I really need my pressing to be super even and I need everything to be like just so, it's a good idea to press before you turn, because then at least you'll have that crease in place. And even if the sort of tuck comes untucked, you can still see where that crease is to move things back into position, press them again, and have it just absolutely perfect. But I didn't take the time to press it under before we started, so I was just eyeballing. Now, this is also a great opportunity with the top stitching if you wanted to like do something decorative. If you have decorative stitches on your machine, you could use a decorative stitch. You could use a contrast thread. You can use a complementary thread. I'm going to be stitching mine on one side in black, and I think I'm going to stitch the other side in gray if I can find my gray threads. And the way that works is that you do the bobbin color in one color and the top thread in another, so you can have two tones. When I was starting out as a sewist a really long time ago, somebody told me I had to have exactly the same thread in both the bobbin thread and the top thread, and I interpreted that as I was not allowed to mix and match colors, that somehow the sewing police would come and arrest me for mixing colors. No one will do that. However, sometimes you do need to mix different weights of thread, top and bottom. That's usually the case if you're doing like a top stitching thread or a metallic thread or any sort of specialty thread. You still need to have like a kind of all-purpose weight in your bobbin to go with that sort of specialty fancy top stitching thread. So, but in our case, we're just using all-purpose thread for both. And I thought it would be nice to have a different color to go on the black side so that it has a little bit of excitement to it. And so it looks a little decorative. However, if you do not want your top stitching to show, this is a great opportunity to pick a thread that will really blend into your project. Do I have any gray threads? I do, but where is it? The other option is to do a more fun color like purple or red. What do we think? So one side is gray and black and the other side is black, which is why I was thinking gray, but I can't find my gray, so I might go with purple instead. This is for Eve, so I can be kind of wild. So we've got our black side, and then we've got our mysterious Ouija board side. Oh my gosh, Robin, getting delicious food. The other option is to do a gold, kind of go with the gold of the hardware. So this is my request for feedback. We've got purple for a little pop of purple on the underside or on the black side, and we've got gold which kind of picks up the metallic hardware. Purple, says Robin. Okay, purple. Purple it is.
Purple.
Purple. We're gonna do purple. Great. I love purple, so I'm definitely on board with this plan. Okay. I pulled out a bobbin, set it down, and don't remember where I set it down. There we go. The problem with the bobbins for my Janome is that they're clear and they disappear on my white work table. And so I'm just like, where did it go? Where is that tiny clear thing?
Yeah, I'm waiting for the great big cutting mats at Joann's to go on sale, and I'll pick them up because it'll be the size of my drafting table, which is green.
Oh, those are the best. Those cutting mats are so good.
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I used one for years, and really until we replaced the cutting table.
Yeah, this is 35 by 70, so it'll fit the top of my drafting table.
Ooh, nice.
But, yeah, I figured out that if I wait for them to go on sale in Joann's, it's like $130.
Oh.
And it's been in my wish list for Amazon, and it's like hasn't gone below like 175.
Oh.
I'm
Well,
like, that's just a little too much.
It is a little too much. So yay for sales. Also,
Yeah.
hopefully
Just
Joann's is going to do more sales.
Yeah, I think they are.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Sadly. I mean, it's a mixed bag, right? On one hand, I don't really want them to go out of business because they are the main source of fabric and notions for lots and lots of us. On the other hand, they've run their own business into the ground. So
yeah, I was hoping that when Michaels bought what was left of Hancock's that they would bring it back, but it's all on. I mean, you can order it online, but it's still not Hancock's.
No, and I honestly did not know that Michaels had bought what remained of Hancock's.
Yeah, you can buy fabric online from them.
I mean, that's great, except a lot of folks want to be able to touch their fabric, which is like such a reasonable thing to want. It's why when I talk about buying fabric online, I talk a lot about swatching first. And a lot of companies like Mood or Silk Baron are really good about having swatches. Fabricstore.com, that's where they get, like, I get a lot of my linen. They do a nice size swatch. But if you're going to some of the smaller stores, they won't swatch. They sort of insist you buy a quarter yard. And depending on the fabric, a quarter yard is not that expensive. But then I end up with a lot of weird quarters of yards of things that I may or may not want to make something out of. Okay. That's why we have to keep doing stash busters, though, because I keep swatching all of these quarter yard pieces. All right, so let's get stitching. When I'm doing top stitching, I usually increase the length of my stitch. And normally I go up to 3 millimeters. Sometimes if it's thick fabric, I go up to 4. For the most part, top stitching is just like securing things, a little bit decorative, but it doesn't need to be as tight as your internal stitching. And that longer length is just slightly more aesthetically pleasing. So that's really why I choose to go up in size. I do have decorative stitches on my machine, but nothing that I think will be particularly attractive for this project. So I'm going to stick with a nice straight stitch. And as with a lot of my things like this, I tend to do something very close to the edge. Of course, I've misplaced my bodkin because I'm regularly misplacing my bodkin. So pardon me. I like to use my bodkin as a pointer, but we'll use a little unicorn pin. So there's this little seam in the metal of my presser foot where the foot joins to the shank. And this is the seam line I use as my guide for my edge stitching. So I line the edge of my fabric up with that little seam in my foot, and that helps me keep it pretty even. You can also get feet that will help you do this, but I don't have one. So if I do a back tack for something like this, I usually do like a very small back tack, because what will happen is I will complete my row of stitching over where I started, and that kind of serves the same purpose. But I gave myself a single stitch back tack just to make sure nothing comes undone while I'm working. When I'm doing this kind of sewing, the most important thing I do for myself is that I go kind of slow. Going slow helps me stay accurate. I actually have a throttle on my sewing machine. So if I feel like I'm getting a little overexcited or I've been over caffeinated and I can't contain myself and I can't go slow, then I can throttle my machine a little bit and force myself to move slower. But these days, I'm usually able to contain myself. I do find that the clips are so perfect for this kind of project. It's small. The cotton is not slick at all. I'm just really using the clips to keep things tucked away. Do watch out. Some of my metal bits are wanting to fold under my belt as I'm working. And that's just because they're cheeky and they're trying to break my needle. But watch out, because you don't want to break your needle at this juncture. It'd be such a pain in the tuchus. I'm still using a size 12 needle. This fabric is just not very thick. Now we're coming around to the curve, and I'm going to be honest, you guys. I did not do my best, most accurate sewing when I stitched this end of the curve during last week's session. So it's pretty funky looking, but I'm just going to do my best. And I don't think Eve is going to be like, I don't want your gift. That curve is too weird. As we're coming along here to the part with the little straps, you are going to experience a little bit more thickness. So hopefully, since you've already got a head of steam up with your stitches, you're not going to have any problems. But if it doesn't quite want to go over that hump, you can always pull out one of these little hump jumper, guys. If you're working with any upholstery fabric, the thickness is going to get very thick at this juncture. Okay. Does somebody have a bird? I hear a bird and it is definitely not here. If you have a bird, I'm going to ask to meet your bird. Once I'm on the less fussy bit, I can pick up my stitching a little bit. Coming around on the end, I did a better job on, although again, not like a perfect curve. These curves are kind of tight, and I was admittedly not paying attention super close. I was too busy chatting and having a delightful time, as happens. But the only people who will know that my curve is janky are y'all and me. Okay, now I've overlapped my stitches. I'm going to give myself a last little back tack where everything overlaps. And now I've got my top stitching in place. And the purple thread is like a wonderful little pop of color on this side without being like super obvious, which is nice. We really just have 2 steps left on this guy, and then we're done, which is very exciting. I am going to trim my threads before I go on to the next little bit. So I will be using my invisible zipper foot for this segment. This is an extra step that is not talked about in the pattern and is not required. You can be basically done at this point, and just attaching your ribbons. So you do not have to do this next step. I'm just going to demonstrate it on like 1 or 2 of the tabs, but I'm going to go in with my little zipper foot, my invisible zipper foot, and I'm going to stitch very close to the metal to hold it in place so it's not rattling around as much, and so it doesn't have as much motion and it doesn't travel as much in my tab. So that is my next step. And then I'm going to show you how she attached her ribbon lace so you can see what that method is. I'm going to be putting in grommets on mine, and they're going to be fussy because I interface both sides. It's a little bit harder to make your grommet hole through interfacing because interfacing is so stable, it doesn't want to move out of the way. So instead of showing that to you, because it's a bad example of setting grommets, and there will be a lot of swearing, I'm just going to tell you about the grommeting. You guys have heard me swear before, but maybe not that much. It's a lot when I'm setting grommets. So, hello, Martha. It's good to see you. Welcome, welcome.
Hello, hello. Sorry I'm late.
You're
I
perfectly on time.
always talk to my family on Wednesday nights at 7.
Mm.
So,
Good to know.
yep.
Good
So
to know. Well,
talk to them
you missed
online.
you missed the top stitching, but I am recording, and of course I will post this later. So this is my little invisible zipper foot. You can see it's like got this very narrow foot. And one of the cool things about these is that they have this style at least has a little screw, and you can loosen that screw so that you can, adjust the position of your foot along this kind of metal track. So you can pop it to either side of the seam, which is very nice. I usually start with it totally closed up, and then I get it in position, and then I see where I want it to be before I adjust it. My Janome uses a system of snapping feet that snap to my shank. When I'm using something like this, I have to take off a portion of the shank, and then this screws into place. It's not a Janome foot, it's a generic foot, but you can get the kind that go with your machine. When it comes to feet, some feet you can get generic, they're fine. They're going to work great. You don't have to go get the brand name. Other things, I actually think it's important to get the brand name, not because they're better necessarily, but because they will be engineered to fit into your sewing machine without causing problems with the tension. And for me, that would be a walking foot and a ruffler foot. I think you need to get the kind that's made by your manufacturer to go with your machine to make sure it really fits right and it's not going to like mess with the tension. The worst that would happen in this scenario, if I got the wrong size or the wrong depth, it was for the wrong style of shank on my machine, the worst that would happen is it wouldn't work. It's not going to destroy the tension on my machine. But you do need to know if you have a short shank machine, which is a real tongue twister, or if you have a long shank, and make sure you get the right style to go with your machine. I use my invisible zipper foot mostly for making piping. I use it a lot in corsetry. Like this is essential to corsets for me. And very rarely I actually put a zipper in, but it almost never gets used for putting in a zipper, to be honest. That's because I don't do that many zippers. I only do a zipper if I have to. So I'm not really ready to stitch. And since I haven't done this particular project with this particular set of findings before, I'm going very carefully to make sure that I am positioned properly. So I tend to sink my needle and then like figure out where my zipper foot needs to go. So if I need to move it further away or closer to, I don't actually nestle this little divot around the actual needle. I want it to run kind of beside. And possibly if I didn't have a generic foot, it would be engineered just so, and I could have it nestled around my needle and life would be good. But I don't want my needle to get broken. And you can see when I drop the foot, it comes slightly forward of my needle. So it doesn't actually nestle in that little divot. I am very close to the metal, but I'm like not right on it. Almost, I could almost graze the metal with my needle. You have questions. If you're not sure if you have it in position, I recommend just manually moving your needle to make sure that when you're stitching, you're not going to inadvertently hit any metal. It's a great idea to go a little bit slow. I'm gonna do some back tacking here. Okay. Making that a very nice little set of stitches. You can really see the purple stitches from the back and how that's like really keeps that from, it's not going to be able to twist and turn in there. Now it has got a lot less play. And so that's going to cut down on wear and tear, but it's also going to make these more stable. Whereas if you do not if you do not put your stitches there, you can see how your little hardware can really move around. So I'm going to do one more. Same deal. I always manually drop my needle first when I'm dealing with metal like this, because then I can make sure as soon as I feel any resistance against the needle, I can stop. And I can reverse my movement to keep from breaking my needle. I do like to stitch really slow with this sort of thing. And I do like a long back tack on these. But it absolutely makes it a little nicer, a little bit more finished. And again, now my metal bits, my findings cannot move out of position, which is really magical. Once I'm comfortable, I can let hubris be my guide. I can move a little faster. But even when I pick up the pace, I still take it pretty slow. And it doesn't really take a lot of time to do that, but it is an extra step. So keep that in mind. Of course, I have a million threads to snip now. But yeah, that is how we finish up those little tabs for our hooks. Any questions about that? I'm gonna go in and snip some thread. I don't have to snip it right now, but I'm thinking about it. And honestly, when I do not immediately snip my threads at this juncture in a project, when I'm like doing the finishing portions, I will forget, and then we'll be at the event, and some dear friends like Alicia will be like, girl, did you know you have this thread sticking up straight out of your bust dart that is like, looks like you've grown an eyelash over your breast? It's not a good look. Makes them look like headlamps. So we don't want that. This is the first pair of snips I've ever owned. I've always done with like little embroidery scissors and things. I've never had one of these little spring-loaded sets of snips. I'm obsessed with them now. They are perfect for snipping threads. I get it at last. And they're inexpensive. They're just like a not essential tool, but a handy tool. Okay, let's look at our very last step. Unless you are like me and you want to grommet your ties into position. If you are grommeting, I recommend stepping back no less than a ½ inch, but I'd probably do 3/4 of an inch. And I'd position my grommet right in the middle of this little curve, or roughly a curve. I did a very fascinating job on my stitching last time. I would just put it right there, and I would just do one. I don't think I need two for this particular position of the belt. If you are taking my suggestion and you decided to adjust the size of your belt by putting grommets and laces at each seam, I recommend doing two, because then you can do a little X situation, and that'll be like very attractive, but also a little stronger. And I would just position them again, like about 3/4 of an inch in from the seam allowance. And I would just space them evenly in that space. Okay. For our example, she recommends using a little grosgrain ribbon. I don't have any in the house, and I don't have any satin ribbon either that I like, but I just want to show you how to set this up so that you can finish it. One of the reasons I like doing the grommet and having that grommet and lace is because then it makes this entirely reversible, 100%. But it also makes it a little bit more adjustable. If you are doing the ribbon attachment method, you're going to pick your right side of your belt, and then you want to position the raw end of your ribbon pointing towards the end of the belt, just a little ways in, like about a ½ inch. You're going to do a bar tack over that, and then you're going to fold the ribbon over that raw edge, covering it, and do some bar tacks over that. A bar tack is just a zigzag stitch. I'm going to show you what it looks like because I can take my stitches out. And I'm actually going to just position it where I would put my grommet, so no one will ever see those stitch marks anyway, because I'm going to put a piece of metal there. But I want to demonstrate how this bar tack works. Okay, so to make my bar tack, I'm going to have my widest zigzag stitch. I'm going to put it on like my sort of narrowest position, kind of like I would do with a buttonhole, because essentially you're making the same kind of zigzag stitch you would do with your buttonhole. I'm going to give myself a little pin so that this does not move out of position while I'm getting it aligned under the presser foot. All right, let's take a look. So I've got my raw edge pointing away from me towards the end of the belt. And if you are using a ribbon that has different sides, you want to make sure the right side is facing the right side of your fabric. Really helps if I put my zigzag stitch on. So we're going to just zigzag a few stitches over this. And once I've done a few stitches going forward, I'm going to do a couple of stitches going backwards. There's a little bar tack. We'll really hold that in pretty nice, but we can see the raw edge, and we really want to cover up that raw edge. So now I'm going to take my ribbon, I'm going to fold it over that raw edge like so. And then I'm going to go in and repeat that zigzag. I'm going to do a little reverse stitch and then a little forward stitch. And you are absolutely, that is very strong. It is not going anywhere. And now your project is done. So it goes pretty fast. The finishing bits are really straightforward, but they're nice little techniques that you can take into other projects as well. Because who doesn't want to put a little ribbon on stuff occasionally? This is a very easy way to make sure you can have a ribbon tacked in place and bury those raw edges, because you don't want them to run, and you want them to be secure, not just from aesthetics, but it actually maintains the integrity of your ribbon. It also means when somebody yanks on it, it's not going to come undone. Now, I just grabbed a piece of GIMP that I happen to have next to my sewing machine from when I was making those Star Trek uniforms, because I used this black braid as decoration in some key spots on those costumes. But so I had a little bit left over, and I just wanted to have enough to demo. Now, I will be taking this out and replacing it with a grommet. But if you are doing this method and you're doing like a contrast stitch or a contrast thread on the reverse side, you probably are going to want to do a thread for this portion that blends in on the opposite side so people can't see your bar tack. That's just like a little bit of an aesthetic choice, but that's it. That's the undercorset belt. In the future, we're going to make some pouches for this bad boy, because who doesn't love a pouch? Who doesn't love being able to carry their teacup and their fan with them for every occasion? It's very handy. I do think if you feel comfortable and you have the wherewithal, I highly recommend doing this extra step with the stitching next to your metal parts, your D-rings and your hooks, because it is just nicer. I can tell you, it feels nicer. They feel more secure, and they feel like they are not going to like sort of drop anything or get weirdly, twisted on me. We don't want our D-rings to end up upside down while we're wearing it. And without those stitches in place, they really will move around. As you can see, I did that fairly easily. So anyway, that's it. That's the project, you all. Congratulations on another project, another stash buster. And for those of you who are working on other things, congratulations on what you're working on. That's fantastic. So very exciting. This was a very breezy project. I love those. It did not require a lot of fabric. I think even with the pouches, you're looking at probably under a yard of fabric. If you did every pouch, you might end up using a yard of fabric, maybe, but it really does not use up a lot of fabric, which I think is wonderful. Sometimes you just have a few little scraps that you want to get rid of, or you have been buying too many quarter yards from a fabric store to try and figure out what you're going to use to make a project. And so now you're like, oh, we've got all this leftover fabric and no home for it. Make a corset belt. It'll be perfect. Oh, do we have a baby? Oh, look at that cutie. Look at that cutie. What a sweet face. Take very good care of yourselves, drink the good tea, stay hydrated, get rest from your most recent convention adventures, everybody. And we'll gossip more on Sunday. All right. Good night.